Welcome to our webinar on how a contract is created using the Federal Acquisition Regulation. This is part 3 in a 4-part series on understanding the rules of government contracting. A recording of part 1, which was understanding the FAR, and part 2, how the government plans its contracts, are both available on our website. And at the end, we'll show a slide with the schedule for part 4. My name is Christina Kunkel, and I'm the Program Director for the Northern California Procurement Technical Assistance Center. I'm just going to speak briefly about the services of the PTAC and SBDC programs before our procurement specialist, Lenny Bean, begins his presentation. So we are a nonprofit program of the Norcal SBDC. The PTAC and the SBDC are both federally funded and hosted by Humboldt State University Sponsored Programs Foundation in Arcata, California. The Norcal PTAC is funded to provide free one-on-one counseling services on procurement topics to businesses in Del Norte, Humboldt, Mendocino, Shasta, Siskiyou, Solano, and Trinity counties. That's shown in the map on your left in green. And these county restrictions are determined by federal definitions of economically distressed counties. There are also about 100 other PTACs across the US. The Norcal SBDC is shown here on the map to the right in red. Each color on the map on the right represents a different SBDC region. SBDCs provide free one-on-one counseling services on more general business topics and may sometimes be able to assist with procurement topics. Their service area slightly overlaps the PTAC service area from the Oregon border in Del Norte County all the way down the coast to the Bay Area and down to Santa Cruz County. To apply for SBDC services, you can click on the blue link here to find the SBDC nearest you. And again, this will be sent to you after the webinar is over. This webinar was funded with support from the Norcal PTAC and the Norcal SBDC. And if you're unsure which service center is appropriate for your needs and location, don't hesitate to contact me. I'll direct you to the appropriate resource. You'll receive an email immediately following this webinar with a request to submit a brief evaluation. You can simply reply to that email with any questions about your eligibility or any other questions. And also, I noticed when reviewing the registration that some of you attending today are out of state or otherwise located outside of the Northern California region. There are PTACs and SBDCs all over the United States, so I can help you direct you to the one nearest you. The Norcal PTAC provides 3 core services, all of which are free to clients within the PTAC service area. The first is one-on-one counseling. Our experienced procurement specialists can help you with everything from SAM registration, getting a DUNS number, minority, veteran, or other certifications, crafting capability statements, GSA schedules, any other government contracting topics. We can help you understand where your business fits in the government marketplace, how to market yourself, and your local SBDC can also provide free one-on-one counseling, but on more general business topics like how to write a business plan, how to start a business, how to get a loan, things like that. Second, we provide free webinars like this one and in-person workshops on government contracting topics. These webinars and workshops are always free and open to anyone, regardless of your location. And third, we can set up those within our service area with a free bid matching service with daily access to federal, state, and local opportunities specifically catered to you and your business. We also post local opportunities on our social media, so make sure you like our Facebook page. To apply for PTAC services, visit norcalptac.org, click on the big green button right on the front page, and don't hesitate again to contact me if you have any questions about your eligibility. The content of this presentation was provided by the Georgia Tech Procurement Technical Assistance Center, so thank you, Georgia Tech. And a quick housekeeping note, you're all muted right now to avoid distractions in the background. At the end, I'm going to unmute you. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please move your mouse to the bottom of the screen. A black bar will appear as seen in this photo. Click on the chat button on the bottom middle of the screen to send a message. And Lenny will be monitoring the chat window. He can answer questions during the presentation. We'll also have about 10 minutes at the end to answer questions, and that's when I'll unmute you. You can just speak freely. So without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome Norcal PTAC Procurement Specialist, Lenny Bean.
Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, we wanted to give everybody kind of a heads up. For those of you who are already registered with the federal government in a system called SAM, System for Award Management, and for those who are looking to do business with the federal government, that is the system you would sign up with. Recently, we've had some clients who have received text messages after registering in SAM, asking for various information from them via text message. Want to just make it clear that if you get these things, delete them. What they're after is your personal information. In the federal government, for procurement anyway, doesn't send you text messages on registrations or procurement. It's all done via email or hard copy. So just kind of a heads up, just make sure you don't get yourself in trouble. And if you have any other questions regarding that, please give us a call and we will help you out. So today we have another riveting presentation on federal acquisition regulations. The first module, as Christina mentioned, was to acquaint you with the rules that apply to federal contracting and how the rulemaking is done via Congress through the National Defense Authorization Act. And so that's where the rulemaking took place. And then in the second module, we talked about how the government, plans its purchasing, how it forecasts its businesses that they're going to contract with, and all the planning rules. So this module, we're going to talk how the government goes out and asks for bids and how to respond. You need to understand those federal rules, give you insights into how most state and local government contracting works. Also, however, the FAR does not apply to state and local government contracting, but a lot of the rules are very similar in nature, but they are not exactly the same. So they may do some, I call it copy and paste of some of these rules, but it's always tweaked to what that state's legislature wants to do. So contract formation. So solicitation of offers, evaluation of the offers, and then award the contracts, 3 basic steps. We want to go out and solicit offers from businesses, we're going to do an evaluation, then we'll award a contract. It's all governed by federal regulations, and it's based on common law legal rules, which we'll talk about briefly. So general principles, promises come in a variety of, and bear on almost every aspect of human endeavor. Even in an age touched by cynicism, which seems to be around, your word is still valued highly. Complex society requires us to rely upon each other, and that confidence of promise, it must be kept. And as we get even more complex in our economy, the importance of keeping that promise, takes on a heightened role. If the one party fails to keep his or her promise, there's harm to the other party. So the basic of contract law is to identify those promises above, which would be enforceable in a court of law. So that's when the FAR comes in, and we'll go over some more definitions, but it's important to recognize that because of the complex way we do business, that FAR regulation has to be followed essentially to the letter of that law. Otherwise, you could end up in in a legal situation. So let's start with a solicitation. So let's say that you want to remodel the inside of your house. So you're the contracting officer, and you are going to go out and ask for bids. You're going to solicit companies for bids. You're going to invite them to either on a sealed bid, they'll send you a proposal, or you want to maybe negotiate each one, take a look at what they have to offer, or if it's just a very straightforward, oh, it's a $2,000 marble top for your kitchen counter, maybe you don't even go through a big process except to procure from the lowest bidder. But as you're the contracting officer, you're asking the bids for the remodel, you're going to make the selection, and then there'll be a contract signing that obligates both parties. So it's really that simple, except now we have the federal acquisition regulation that is thrown into the mix. So an offer, it's a response to a solicitation. So if somebody made you an offer, ABC contractor, and if you accept it, then it binds that company to perform the contract. Sealed bidding, invitation for bids, they usually call bids or sealed bids. There's not really a negotiation process. You accept the invitation for bid, and you award them the contract. But it's not awarded until that offeror signs it as well. Request for quotations, that's more in the simplified acquisition. So it's not a request for a proposal, but it's a request for a quotation. And typically it's for, kind of hard items. You want to buy, 10 gun stocks or 42 Microsoft mice for your computers. And so you'll see a lot of that, just a request for quotation. And it's not an offer, it's simply a request for a quotation. And as a contractor, you would submit it and wait for them to provide the actual contract offer. And until you sign it, it's not a contract. So what is a contract? It's a promise or set of promises, which if breached, as I mentioned earlier, the law will remedy. The law will recognize a duty to carry out that promise. Spells out duties and responsibilities of both parties. So it covers both parties. It's not a one-sided agreement. And I like to use the term win-win. It should be, as a contractor, it should be achievable. You should be able to carry out the duties for the contract, but it also spells out the responsibilities of the government, in this case, of what they're supposed to do in that contract. So if either party fails to perform, law steps in, lawyers are hired, and the fun begins. So the definition of a contract, again, both parties to perform, and when it goes into courts, if it ever gets to that point, that court will fashion a remedy for the failure. And fashion, it could be, involve both parties, or it could be one-sided. So a contract is strictly a legal concept. It's enforceable through the legal system. And the system itself, the court system, deems of sufficient social or economic importance to warrant enforcement. So a lot of times it would go get into a court situation and it would get thrown out because it's not really of, so we say, economic importance. So the common law system originated in England, of all places. Imagine that, before the American Revolution. And we follow that same processes in our courts. Judges typically follow the rulings of other judges, particularly after something gets to the Supreme Court, and everybody basically follows those judgments. And then a body of law gets developed, and it's relied upon over and over again in similar cases, rather than reinventing the wheel. And then many of those contracting rules that are in the FAR, et cetera, come from that overall common law system. Don't reinvent the wheel. They use similar cases in fashioning changes to the Federal Acquisition Regulation rules. So 6 conditions must be met for a contract to exist. This has nothing to do with federal contracting, but let's say you're going to contract with ABC Construction for your home remodel. Have to have mutual assent. They must have made an offer and you have to have accepted it. Has to have consideration. It has to have some value. What are they going to provide? And what is the amount of dollars you're going to pay? Capacity. This is to understand the agreement. Does ABC company understand the agreement? Do they understand what they have signed up to? And do you understand, as the person buying their service, do you understand, exactly what they're going to do for that value received? And lawful purpose, it's not contrary to public policy. So there's some lawful purpose to this. You're not, let's see, in the state and you want them to plant a marijuana farm, okay? So one thing I could come to mind. So that's contrary to public policy in most states, and so it has to be for a lawful purpose. And in this case, your remodel is a lawful purpose. Certainty of terms, are they clear? A lot of times what gets left out of these agreements or these contracts is dates. Okay, when is this contractor going to start? When are they going to complete it? What kind of materials are acceptable? And maybe even who will work on the project. You have to make them very clear. And the form provided by law is it could be written, it could be oral, or implied. So it doesn't have to be in writing. Could be an oral interchange, and they said they're going to show up on June 2nd, and they don't show up on June 30th. But there was an oral agreement. So I encourage, we have email today, send an email. This is my understanding, please respond. Get it in writing at a minimum in an email. So contracting officers, the balancing act. So they have to ensure that the contractors you receive impartial, fair and equitable treatment. Now, contracting in the past, since the year 2000 or so, at that time there was 100,000 procurement people in the federal government. Over the past 15 years, the amount of money spent in contracting in the federal government has more than doubled. It's like $750 billion a year, pushing towards $1 trillion. And over that time, they went from 100,000 people in procurement to approximately 23,000 today, and they're in the mode of having to hire new people because of the retirement of the boomer generation. So when you're looking at contracting officers, and we'll talk more as we go here, how important it is to make that relationship and follow rules, they simply don't have time to deal with all the nuances that they had time to before. The CEO, they have the power. They can issue the contract. They oversee the execution of the work. They always have to give this balance. It's to get the best deal for the government. And however, they also have to act fairly with the contractor. So if there's issues that come up during the performance of the contract and there's changes, what have you, there's always that balance. What's the best deal for the government? And what's fair to the contractor. So a COR is somebody different, okay? It's a contracting officer's representative. So one of the ways to fill some of these gaps, but they put limitations of authority on these people, and they'll typically get involved once the contract is issued, and they help manage and administer the contract, work out any issues. However, they have absolutely no authority to change a contract. They may influence it in dealing with you and then bringing it to the attention of the contracting officer who has that authority, but a COR absolutely has no authority to make that change. So if a COR and you're getting into a discussion and perhaps want to make some changes, well, if the COR says, well, I'll go ahead, don't wait for the contracting officer to issue an amendment to your contract. In the contract, there should be a written description regarding the COR's authority, including any limitations. Should appear in the contract if they have a COR. If there's not one there, ask for one. And this is the FAR clause it's representative. So, government bid and negotiation rules. So there's different FAR provisions to different contract types. So if you look at sealed bidding, it's in FAR Part 14, contracting by negotiation is Part 15, competition requirements, and you can read the chart. And permissible contract types, sealed bidding is fixed price or fixed price with economic price adjustment. It might be a 5 or 10-year deal, and there's going to be an economic price adjustment downstream. But contracted by negotiation, all types are permitted. So fixed price, cost plus, time and material, etc., can all done contracted by negotiation. Valuation factors on sealed bidding is typically price and price-related factors. Lowest responsible bidder. By negotiation, there are price and non-price factors, and we'll talk a little bit more about those, but one comes to mind is performance. What kind of performance have you had in the past? Not necessarily for the government, but in the commercial workplace for these types of things you're bidding on, and what those factors. And when we say contracted by negotiation, and you could actually get into a negotiation if selected, or they could ask you to update your bid, and we'll talk more about that. So a solicitation for sealed bidding, it's an IFB, invitation for bid. By negotiation, a request for proposal. The other thing in the sealed bidding, it is also referred to sometimes as a request for quotation, and we'll talk more about that. So the offer is called a bid in sealed bidding, and it's called a proposal if you're contracting by negotiation. Uniform contract format. So this is their standard template of putting the RFP and a contract together. There is nothing magic about this. Let me just go to the next slide. So the schedule, I mean, if there is a proposal, now it's gonna, if it is a commercial type proposal, they'll use what's known as FAR Part 12, and it may not follow this list. They'll send you to the FAR Part 12 list of documents and requirements. So this is what is seen mostly, the schedule, contract clauses, third parties list of documents, and Part 4, and we'll talk about this more later, that's where you want to go first. You want to go to the last item on this list, and that's M under Part 4, the evaluation factors for award. That's the first thing you stop and look at, because that's where you're going to make your first bid, no bid decision. You're going to see what they're going to evaluate these proposals on. And it's usually fairly specific of what the evaluation factors are going to be and what combination of factors will be evaluated. The next step is section L right above it, instructions, conditions, and notices. So here's the evaluation factors, here's how the proposal is going to be evaluated, and then here's how you're going to submit those proposals and any other notices to bidders. So you want, in notices, they have amendments to proposals. You got to make sure that you look at all the amendments. Could be a date change for submission, could be an added feature, but they'll issue amendments right up until the RFP release date. But I encourage everybody, you look at a solicitation, go to Section M, then Section L, and you'll very quickly see whether or not you want to proceed or not, and perhaps save some money in the process. So what are solicitations? So a solicitation, it's a term only used in solicitations and only applied before contract award. The contract clause itself is the condition that's in the contract, could show up both in the solicitation and the contract, and could apply after contract award, or both before and after contract award. So contract clause you could see in both places, or one or the other, but it definitely will be in the contract. But a solicitation provision is a very significant difference. That solicitation provision is only in the solicitation, and it gets applied through a contract clause, and they apply only before contract award. A solicitation provision will never show up in the contract itself. So to make sure you understand that just because there's a solicitation provision, that may not determine what the contract clause is going to be in the actual contract. That's a little confusing, but it's important to understand that, because if it's a solicitation provision, make sure you understand that may or may not be something you need to sign up for. So the text, it all depends on what you do. So for example, the ABC construction, or transportation, or supply, you could provide communication services. So that FAR matrix will show you where, because of the type of business you're in, or the type of contract you are going after, make sure you look at the FAR matrix to see which provisions and clauses are related to what you're bidding on, because they will be different depending on the different contract types. So each provision or clause is prescribed and includes all the conditions and requirements for using the provisions. The FAR is not incorporated in federal contracts. It is what is prescribed by the FAR, which gets incorporated into the federal contracts, into contract clauses. So various provisions of the FAR, those specific clauses found in Part 52 are actually inserted into the contracts. So the FAR is the prescription, but the actual clause that gets in the contract, it's prescribed by the FAR and then incorporated into the contract itself. Now, make sure you see all the amendments. If it's revised after a solicitation is issued, the change does not apply. But just because the FAR comes along and issues an update after you have received the contract, it simply does not apply unless that contracting officer wants to amend the solicitation. By amending the solicitation, that's an update to the solicitation and an opening to submit a new bid if you so choose to do so. Or if it's under contract, the CEO could bilaterally just modify it to include that revised provision or clause. And again, if you remember, we were talking about earlier, it has to be fair and equitable. So that contracting officer is looking at, if I bilaterally do this, is it fair to the contractor, and is it protect the government? So they have to go through that process to make that determination. But any change you receive to any contract, please read it, check it out, and ask questions of that contracting officer if you don't understand what the impact is to your contract. So there are rules for amending or canceling. So the contracting officer just can't go willy-nilly and do whatever they want, whenever they want. They have to, if they're going to amend a solicitation, there's a FAR 15206 that talks on what the rules are for amending a solicitation, either before or after all the offers are in. And 14208 is invitation for bid. Again, this is before bids are submitted. And then 14209 is simply canceling a solicitation. There are specific rules in these FAR clauses that the contracting officer absolutely must follow. So they are very rule bound. So late submittals and withdrawal of offers. There's a 14303, it's withdrawal of bids. So you will typically see in these solicitations, in some case, they'll actually tell you that the submission of this bid, by submitting your bid, this could turn into a contract exactly as it's stated in the solicitation. So at that point, when you submit it, make sure you understand that you can't just say, oh, I changed my mind. So then the submission, modification, withdrawal of bids, there's rules of when those can be withdrawn. And 208 is the withdrawal of proposals. 304 is withdrawal of bids. Let's see if So what is your responsibility for making a timely proposal submittal? So it's the bottom line. You want to obviously check for amendments. You're responsible for submitting the proposal so as to reach the government in the time specified. They may use any transmission method authorized by the solicitation. Make sure you read that section L, exactly how do they want it. They want 10 copies, 3-hole punched and FedExed in, or simply an email, a submission on a standard form. If there is no time specified in solicitation, it's always 4:30 wherever the government office is, not where you are. So if it's in DC and you're in California, you're going to take into consideration that they're, what, 2 or 3 hours ahead. So bottom line, proposals, modifications, revisions received after that deadline are considered late and usually are not considered. I would change that. It says usually, but I've never in my career seen them accept anything that came in after the deadline. So responsiveness criteria. The mantra is follow the instructions and give them what they want in the order they ask for it. Don't make them hunt and peck. You may have conformed to all the requirements, but they said, I want this in section 1, this in section 2, this in section 3, and you've mixed it up. Yeah, it's a responsive bid, but they can't find it. It isn't in the order they asked for it. It's so much easier just to label it exactly as they asked for it and then give them what they want. and follow the instructions to the letter in the invitation. Don't submit alternate proposals. They'll just get rejected, and it drives them crazy. Give them what they want and in the order they ask for it. And the question du jour is, have you ever attended a bid opening? So a lot of these are, you wouldn't actually attend the bid opening, but there would be an announcement of who the awardee is. And if it's not you, or if it is you, always ask for a debrief. You want to know why you won as much as why you lost this opportunity. And there's a very tight time frame. I think it's within a week you have to ask for that debrief. They don't automatically have to give you a debrief unless you ask for it. So make sure you pick up the phone, send them an email, make the request, get a confirmation of that request via email back. And be nice, don't, demanding, why'd you give it to so-and-so? You want to understand how you can compete better in the future. Please let me know what my shortcomings were or what my upcomings were as the winner. It certainly is good information for your future bid opportunities. So bid rejections. So one of the things to remember here is these bid rejections, the contracting officer is going to make a decision. They could waive some of these minor things and informalities or irregularities, often a mistake. However, if it's only advantageous to the government, will they give you an opportunity to fix it? So only to the advantage of the government. If it's not the advantage of the government, they're not going to do it. So it could be things like number of copies of the bid to be submitted. You submitted 3, they needed 4. You had to say number of employees working with the company, and you forgot to put that in. Or you said there was 10, there's actually 20, or any clerical errors. And so again, sometimes they'll say, okay, gee, resubmit your proposal, clean this up, but only if it is to their advantage. So proposal evaluation. There's cost or price, past performance, technical, and small business contracting. So the exact proposal evaluation criteria, it's spelled out in that section M. Remember section M? And one of the things I would recommend people to do if they've never done a bid before is, after we're done with the session, go to FedBizOps, pull up an RFP, and take a look at section L and section M of an RFP. You get a better feel for how important that is. So they go through an evaluation process. They'll go through cost or price, review that, past performance, if it's required, any technical if that's required, and small business subcontracting. The contracting officer does not do this in a vacuum. They have people and or teams of people that will do the past performance or the technical or cost evaluation. So let's talk about deficiency. So a material failure of a proposal to meet a government requirement, it would increase the risk of contract performance to an unacceptable level. It can be corrected as a revision to a proposal, but it only applies to proposals. So the government could point out some weaknesses and get a proposal revision, and that's usually done in a conversation, not simply an email or et cetera, or hard copy. And the thing here is, for bids, like invitation for bids and request for quotations, this does not apply. only for proposals where they've found a weakness, perhaps in you had some unsuccessful contract performance, your past performance, the people you're going to use on this contract, they don't think is going to measure up, and they could actually then ask for you for an update. Doesn't happen a lot, but it can do it. So exchanges with the offerors after they got the proposal. So unlike bids, which they just is a bid, and instances of proposals, it's permitted, but only under certain circumstances. So they may allow you to give a proposal for revisions to clarify it. At the conclusion of each discussion, each offeror is still in what is known as the competitive range. So they have multiple offers. They have 10 bids, 5 are in the competitive range. They have to give everybody an opportunity to submit a final proposal based on those discussions. So to keep a level playing field, they may only have discussions with one party, but based on those discussions, they have to go out and let all that are in the competitive range that this is a change, and here's an opportunity to submit a final proposal revision. Lots of times there's clarifications. So these are handy dandy quick guides to handling proposals. So you can see the sealed bidding again and the contracting by negotiation and what parts of the FAR you would look to do that. And then the evaluation, which is price here, contract, which is lowest price responsive bidder, and best value. You'll probably hear that term, contract by negotiation from a responsible offeror. What is the best value? So best value is not just price, but it could be past performance, could be some of the systems and processes that you use that give the government the best value. So if it doesn't comply, it's simply non-responsive, and it's called unacceptable when you're contracted by negotiation. So you will be taken out of the qualified bidders. So withdraw your offer anytime before the bid opening and anytime before it's awarded. You may withdraw your offer. I say that cautiously because once you've submitted, you're kind of committed to move forward. But if there's a real showstopper, there is an opportunity. Look in those, like in FAR Part 14, sealed bidding. Take a look at what those rules are. And negotiation is prohibited for sealed bidding, but it's permitted if you're contracting by negotiation. So this gives you an idea of how, in which parts of the FAR handles the authority and features of the bid and proposal performance of the contracting officer. Responsible prospective contractor. So it has to meet, per this FAR 9104, that you have adequate financial resources, ability to meet the delivery performance schedule, satisfactory performance record, and I want to make note of the performance record. The performance record, so this is your first time submitting a proposal to the FAR, and they ask for your past performance. Well, your commercial performance record is important. You have spent 20 years constructing metal buildings. You want them to know that. That's satisfactory. It does not have to be a federal contract. It does not have to be a state contract. It doesn't have to be a government contract. But you have to show that you have this satisfactory performance record and necessary organization and accounting skills. Take a drink here. Give me 1 second, we'll wet my whistle. There can be special standards on responsibility. So special standards. You must be qualified to work at a nuclear facility, or you have to have a specialized facility that you either own, going to have to run, and needed for contract performance. So there could be special things that fall into that responsibility category that you're going to be held accountable to. So for subcontractors, from proposals, most times there will be FAR clauses that get flowed down to the subcontractor, and the prime contractor is responsible for determining that responsibility. Stay right in the contract what the expectations of those flow downs are, and in the bidding process, you need to let those subcontractors know that these particular clauses will flow down, and to take that into consideration in their bid. So again, this is a system. It's also known as a past performance information retrieval system. Once you perform on federal contracts, contracting officers and the COR does it a lot too, is put in the performance you had on that contract into this system, FAP. IIS, or it's also known as Past Performance Information Retrieval System. And so they are required to go look there first to see if there's any past performance on a federal contract. So certificate of competency. What happens if the CO finds, this is an interesting one, they find you're not responsible. You failed to hold up your end of the deal. So if you are a small business, the contracting officer is supposed to refer the case to the Small Business Administration. So the SBA then notifies that small business of this impending decision and allows firm to apply for a certificate of competency. So if this contracting officer feels pretty leery of this particular small business, he can then enlist the SBA to get a certificate of competency from that prospective small business, and then the SBA will decide whether or not to issue that CFC. And if granted, then the contractor's award is required to be made to the small business. But the SBA gets involved in deciding, and it's kind of like a court of appeals, if you will. So, but it gives that small business kind of a second chance to see if they will be allowed to move forward. So pricing policy, they know a lot more than we think sometimes, they being the contracting officers and their teams. They've bought items over and over again. There's a ton of information that they have access to see what was negotiated before for identical items, similar items, other sources. So they're obligated to look at all that information to determine what they believe is a fair and a reasonable price. Sometimes they will come up with a range. So in FAR 15400 describes those cost and price policies and procedures, includes subcontracts as well as prime contracts, including modifications to contracts awarded by sealed bidding. So if there's a modification to something that's awarded by sealed bidding, they have there's policies that talk to how that is performed, how they come up with the price. So the award process is in various pieces of the Federal Acquisition Regulation, as you can see. So in order to be considered, contracting officers, there's a lot of complaints that they make the bid and proposal process difficult for them because you don't furnish or adequately or at all the information requested. I'll go back to the mantra of give them what they want in the order they ask for it. Consistently make their job easy, make it easy for them to find it. So here's a list of common bid and proposal. There was a group, Georgia Tech did a search and with the contracting officers, and these are the problems. The COs came back and said, this is the most problems we have with bids being received. Simply a lack of attention to detail, didn't understand, demonstrating understanding requirements, simply did not follow solicitation instructions. Give them what and how they want it, in the order they want it. Lack of responsiveness, and not making it easy to check references. If you're using references or they ask for past performance record, please make it clear to how they can go check those references. If you're using a particular company as a reference, a particular person, make sure that it is spelled out of how to get a hold of these people. An email address is very helpful. A good email address, let me put it that way, one that will be answered. You need to tell your references that, hey, I'm going to put you in this proposal, and you may get a call to for a little testimonial on how great I am. Make sure you tell them. Get a phone number that works. This sounds redundant, but please call the phone number they give you to make sure it doesn't go into a music loop or anything else, that it can get to the person that gave you that reference. So make it easy for them to find it. There's a lot fewer of them, and if you can quickly do that, it'll be very beneficial. So let's go back to the uniform contract format. So what do you want to read first? Typically everybody goes to C, and as you recall, I talked about going to M first, see what the evaluation factors are for award. If you've been in business 2 years and they want people who have had 10 years of experience, well, hello, not going to be a good plan to move forward. And then you want to check the instructions. Can you follow all the instructions, conditions, and notices? Can you provide all of the information that they are required? Then go to the description and specifications. Yeah, I can meet that evaluation. I've been in business for 10 years. I can do that. Yep, I understand what they're asking for in the bid instructions. Those contract line items I can bid. And then you want to then go to the description and specifications to make sure that indeed those can be met by your business. So when making a decision, source selection, There are regulations that the contracting officers have to follow. There's a source selection decision. How do I decide which one I give the contract to? What's the process for notifications to the unsuccessful offerors? And then how the process for awarding the contract to the successful offeror. Talked a little bit about this before. Debriefings, if asked, they are required to give them. So even if you're successful or not, always ask them in a timely fashion. Same day as you receive that you did not or did receive the award, ask for a debrief. Just fire it back to thank you very much and very, very nice about it. I'd like to understand better and set up a time when it can be done. Most of them, I think, now are done over the phone unless there are bigger contracts involved. So protests. Protests are very rarely upheld. Just put that right out there up front. So it's very rare that you get involved in a protest. However, there is regulations that are there to protect the contractors from, let's say, a mistake or an error in the awarding of a contract. So the small business representation, there's some FAR clauses associated with that of who can protest and then who decides. There's a deadline. Make sure you read that FAR for that small business protest. And so what else can be protested to the SBA? There are other FAR clauses. So the protest could be it should have gone to a small business, and so that's the small business representation. So during FY15, there was 2,500 protests. Prevalent reasons for sustaining the protests. The government didn't do a very good job of the cost or price evaluation. It was a past performance evaluation. It was failure to follow the evaluation criteria. The CO and his team didn't follow it. There was inadequate documentation of the record and any other unreasonable, there could be an unreasonable technical evaluation. So they do the price evaluation, past performance, and technical. Maybe in one of those areas they didn't do a good enough job. So, and the word sustaining again is in support of the contractor. The other thing too is, let's see if I can go to the previous screen. For the small business protests, when it talks about who can protest, etc. Each one of these, so for example, 19305, a protest could be, and it typically would be your competitors that making the protest say, oh, you're not a small business, you're not a disadvantaged business status. So if it was set aside for disadvantaged businesses, your competitors, and so if you are not that disadvantaged business that you claim, they're the ones that are going to raise the red flag. The 306 here has to do with hub zone. 307 is service disabled veteran, and 308 is the women-owned small business. Make sure that you, in your SAM registration and any certifications, you are clearly can support who you are and what type of business you are from a small business. Because the people who will find out or protest can file that protest are the other companies that did not get the award, and they're going to ask for a protest to be filed with the SBA. So there's quite a few, 2,500 protests. Again, I don't have the figures at my fingertips, but it's very rare that one is upheld. So we'll move on a little bit about bid proposals, simplified acquisition procedures. There's a variety of, so the sealed bidding, competitive, we talked about that, negotiation. Now we have simplified acquisition procedures. So simplified acquisition procedures is under $150,000. Contracting officers have a lot of latitude on how they award contracts. So to go over a few of these, so here's the quotations. They'll solicit quotation, perhaps. They may use price or factors to evaluate. None of the importance of each evaluation doesn't have to be in the solicitation because it's small. So negotiation is permitted, but so these are when they really need something quickly. Using the simplified acquisition procedure, they can go out and say, hey, need your services. It's going to, and you negotiate the number of hours it takes if it was a service, or the cost of the parts if they need some parts right away. And as stated in the solicitation, the contract award will be made to, as stated in how they want to do it. They can decide exactly how they want to do it on their own under $150,000. Unsuccessful competitors for that don't have to notify them. All they have to do is obviously notify the winner. So there is no debriefing allowed, no debriefing requests in simplified acquisition procedures. SAP was designed to expedite procurements of reasonably low value, so that the contracting could be made quickly at this level. And essentially, that quotation that you submit, it cannot be accepted by the government to form the binding contract. So the order is an offer by the government, and a contract is established when the supplier accepts the offer. So they actually go out under the SAP in simplified acquisition procedure and send an offer to you to maybe get some services, what have you. When you sign that, then it becomes the contract, not until. So it cannot be unilaterally done. So the various methods used, they could issue a purchase order, government commercial purchase card, a credit card, and they can buy lots of things. There's a lot of contracting officers with very large dollar amounts, so particularly used in emergencies. For example, I know of one that can actually pull out their card and buy a helicopter because they need one right away to fight a forest fire. So blanket purchase agreements, impress upon, very rarely used, third-party drafts, again, very rarely used. Purchase order, invoice, voucher, and SF-44. What that is, by the way, is they need something really quick. They need to buy some axes to fight a forest fire, I'll use that example. And so they take their SF-44 and they can take that to a Home Depot, get the supplies they need using that format. So it's a very short approval process, obviously, for them to use that format to go get supplies. And then they could just use the standard form 1449. You'll see that used a lot in solicitations and contracts and orders. That's a standard form that appears in the first page of the contract, signed by both parties, and then it becomes a contract. So these are the various methods that they can use to implement the simplified acquisition process. So dollar thresholds. If you look on it, and this is all, so micro purchase, you can see the levels. So $3,500, they can just essentially do what they want, take out their credit card. And then there's operations within the U.S. and outside the U.S. that they can, those are the thresholds. So up to $30,000 if in Iraq, they can use this process to go get goods and services. So, and then you can see there's some for the Service Contract Act, which is pretty much the same. In construction, subject to Davis-Bacon, it's $2,000. And then overall simplified acquisition can be $150,000 on the normal. There's a contingency, there's an emergency that can go. It could get bumped to $300,000 under certain conditions. And then test program for certain commercial items where they're looking to see whether they'll meet a government specification. There's they can go up to provide a commercial contract for the U.S. of $12 million. And this is the government purchase card. And then as you can see, it goes up to $1 million outside of the country. And then there's the standard Form 484 I talked about. And that's if a particular government employee does not have a credit card, whatever, to go get something, they can use the standard 484 to go do that. So what I'm hoping is you just learned a lot about solicitations and offers. Just to let you know that these contracting officers take 8 to 9 weeks of training every year. And out of those 8 to 9 weeks they spend getting trained, 4 weeks every year is on the federal acquisition regulations alone. Sometimes it's just the changes they're focused on if they've been involved in a while. Otherwise, it is a full 4 weeks for particularly some of the new hires to get up to speed on the federal acquisition regulation. So we talked about evaluation, process of bids, various contracts and types, some of the debriefings and protests, and any common mistakes. So at this point, I'm done, but I think there might be a question here that I didn't see. Hold on. So upcoming workshops on part 4, we'll have that on Wednesday, June 28th. And now we've gone through all those, how the rulemaking was done, how the planning's done, how they submit, put out solicitations and requests for bids. And then we're going to talk about how those are administered. So thank you. An evaluation form will be sent to you. And let me see, we have chats here. What is your FB name, PTAC Norcal? That would be...
Lenny, I already answered that one. And okay. I'm actually going to unmute everyone just in case. I think it's a little easier than using the chat. So okay. Right now, if anyone has any questions, feel free to shout them out.
Can you email us the copy of the presentation?
Yes, you will be receiving an email any minute now that will have a link to not only the slides, those are already posted, but also a recording of the webinar will be posted in the same place later today or tomorrow.
Excellent, thank you.
Great. All right.
Well, everyone have a good day.
All right. Yeah, and if you come up with any questions after the fact, feel free to just reply to the email you're about to get, and we'll answer them for you. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.